It is finally here, everyone. The interview between Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin dropped last night. It's a more than 2 hour video, and it was on Twitter. Carlson and Putin hit a number of different topics, starting with, of course, the war in Ukraine. Here's Carlson on Russia's interesting justification for the war.
The following is an interview with the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, shot February 6, 2024 at about 7 p.m. in the building behind us, which is, of course, the Kremlin. The interview, as you will see if you watch it, is primarily about the war in progress, the war in Ukraine, how it started, what's happening, and most presently, how it might end. One note before you watch. At the beginning of the interview, we asked the most obvious question, which is, why did you do this? Did you feel a threat, an imminent physical threat? And that's your justification. And the answer we got shocked us. Putin went on for a very long time, probably half an hour, about the history of Russia going back to the 8th century. And honestly, we thought this was a filibustering technique and found it annoying and interrupted him several times. And he responded he was annoyed by the interruption. But we concluded in the end, for what it's worth, that it was not a filibustering technique. There was no time limit on the interview. We ended it after more than 2 hours. Instead, what you're about to see seemed to us sincere, whether you agree with it or not. Vladimir Putin believes that Russia has a historic claim to parts of Western Ukraine.
After his 30-minute historical lesson on Tsars and Cathars, Putin chided America for involving itself in the affair, saying there were issues at home that the U.S. should probably prioritize.
Do the United States need this? What for? Thousands of miles away from your national territory. Don't you have anything better to do? You have issues on the border, issues with migration, issues with the national debt, more than $33 trillion. You have nothing better to do, so you should fight in Ukraine? Wouldn't it be better to negotiate with Russia? Make an agreement, already understanding the situation that is developing today?
Carlson then asked Putin who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline back in 2022. After 3 separate investigations by Denmark, Sweden, and Germany, no official culprit has been found. Putin, though he had no evidence, accused the CIA.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day. Nate, do you have I did not blow up Nord Stream. Thank you, though.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi.
Do you have evidence that NATO or the CIA did it?
You know, I won't get into details, but people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested. But in this case, we should not only look for someone who is interested, but also for someone who has capabilities.
At the tail end of the interview, Carlson asked Putin about Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, who's been in a Russian jail since 2023 on charges of espionage. Take a look.
I just got to ask you one last question, and that's about someone who's very famous in the United States, probably not here, Evan Gershkovich, who's the Wall Street Journal reporter. He's 32, and he's been in prison for almost a year. This is a huge story in the United States, and I just want to ask you directly, without getting into the details of it or your version of what happened, if as a sign of your decency, you would be willing to release him to us and we'll bring him back to the United States.
Мы столько сделали жестов доброй воли, что, мне кажется, мы исчерпали все лимиты.
We have done so many gestures of goodwill out of decency that I think we have run out of them.
Ни разу не ответил.
We have never seen anyone reciprocate to us in a similar manner. However, in theory, we can say that we do not rule out that we can do that.
Not everyone was so gung-ho about Carlson's interview. White House spokesman John Kirby said that Americans shouldn't believe anything that Putin said in the interview. Watch.
The American people know well who's at fault here. And I think they know that there was no grounds whatsoever for the invasion on February 22nd, 2 years ago. He invaded a neighboring country without provocation. Ukraine wasn't a threat to anybody, and the American people understand that. And the American people understand what Ukraine's fighting for. And all they're asking for is our help. They're not asking for American boots on the ground. Again, I don't think the American people are going to be swayed by one single interview. And I think anybody that watches that interview, I haven't seen whatever's said, need to make sure remember you're listening to Vladimir Putin, and you shouldn't take at face value anything he has to say.
So I find this really interesting. It seems like a continuation of a bit of Cold War era politics. Following the interview, there was a piece by Politico called 5 Lies and 1 Truth from this Putin interview. I think, telling people not to watch it, it's dangerous, it's all lies. But then, the more liberal breakdown of the lies I found to not be very compelling, actually. They quoted Putin as saying, "It's not that America was going to launch a surprise strike on Russia. I didn't say that." And Politico's reporting he did say that, when what he precisely said was, "We know who the main adversary for the US and NATO is. It's Russia. In NATO documents, our country is officially and directly declared the main threat to Euro-Atlantic security, and Ukraine will serve as the advanced foothold for such an attack." Now, I don't think that's saying we're anticipating a surprise strike from the United States. He also said, they initiated a ban on, the United States, or Ukraine rather, has legislated a ban on anyone negotiating with Russia, them, their allies. And they're saying, that's not correct because they're banning negotiations with Putin, not Russia, but he's the leader of Russia. Who else are you going to negotiate with? They're wanting the leader of the country to send someone else. That sounds to me like, in diplomatic terms, refusing to negotiate with the country by not being willing to meet with their leader and negotiate with them. So there's a lot going on here that's being called lies that I just don't think are lies.
Well, I mean, Vladimir Putin has shown himself to be a brutal dictator time and time again, and his main goal is to rebuild Mother Russia. That's not a new piece of information that was found out in the Tucker Carlson interview, nor is Tucker Carlson's love for Vladimir Putin and his habitual process of almost sounding like Russian state media when he interviews him or when he talks about him in general. He did that when he was on Fox News as well. I do think that there's a problem with ushering in a conversation about the CIA being behind an attack on Nord Stream pipeline because, one, there was no evidence presented. Two, we've up to our ears in conspiracy theory about all things policy at this point, and that does not serve a purpose other than taking the American public down a very odd trail of diminishing our belief in our current systems and forms of government. I think that that's a problem, especially in an election year. Beyond that, we know that it's currently being debated in Congress about funding for Ukraine, and the Republicans have basically dug in their heels there. Having Vladimir Putin, who obviously has his own ideology about Ukraine and wanting to take it over, wanting to again rebuild Mother Russia, this is him pushing propaganda to an American audience. What we know is that Tucker Carlson can have anybody he wants on his show. It's his show. But I do think that there is something to be said about the people that he chooses, especially acknowledging everything that we know about what Russia is doing. Also, their engagement with China, who has shown time and time again that they have no problems with trying to disrupt American infrastructure, in particular, taking down our power grid system. We've seen some of these plans. We've heard, and we've also seen a lot of things there that are problematic, and acknowledging that them having a cozy relationship with Russia, a cozy relationship with Vladimir Putin, is a scary positioning as we talk about geopolitics. There's a frustrating piece here around Tucker Carlson, first and foremost, trying to gather up his views and his ducats. Totally understand that. He's not a part of a major network anymore. However, working against American interests should be a problem for everyone.
I think, when we consider all of the CIA's activities over the past half a century, it's very easy to look and see what the CIA has done and say, any mysterious thing that happens abroad, it could have been them. I get a little bit weary when that's used as propaganda in a direction that helps imperialists, that the CIA is somehow on the other side of imperialism, which has traditionally not been the case. Now, Russia invading Ukraine, I think, was an imperial act. And when we question the CIA's history of, combating, communism abroad, when we consider all of the proxy wars and all of the anti-Russia propaganda that was explicitly pushed. We now know that was the case because of all of the declassified CIA documents that have come out since then. We'll never really know what happened with Nord Stream until we get our next round of declassified documents. But I really think that when that kind of criticism of the United States and how the United States has used covert operations abroad, mostly to protect their flows of capital, mostly to protect, their interests when it comes to the global economy, securing resources, ensuring that there's not a stronghold of, communism anywhere in the world. That's really been the CIA's goal, explicitly so. They say this in a lot of their memorandums. Are they still operating in that way? Maybe. We're not really sure. We won't know for the next 20 years until we get the next round of those documents. But I get really wary when that rhetoric, that criticism is used by people like Tucker Carlson to say, see, the government is bad, they're doing this. And you're describing a government that's fighting imperialism abroad by arming Ukraine. Now, I can see criticizing the United States as being on the same path if you look at our support and how we're supplying weapons to Israel. It's very interesting how Putin is framed as this horrible criminal, but in the case of Israel, you have the invasion of another country, the mass killing of their population, destroying their entire hospital system. Many of the people killed are women and children, entire bloodlines wiped out. When we consider that, it really makes the United States seem like a hypocrite. And for me, you can't have one without the other and claim any kind of logical consistency, which Tucker Carlson frequently tries to do. I don't think he has an approach to politics that is honest. I really do see him as manipulating people. Do I think that we also have a terrible bias against Putin in the media? Yes, and I think both are true at once.
And you're going to get full-on agreement from me there, at least on the point about Tucker Carlson and trafficking in some of these issues that I think are problematic for our government as well. We'll be right back with more Rising after this.